Shivers, The Enchanted Attic by M.D.S. Spencer. Chapter 3. Slowly, Nicole climbed down the ladder. Her knees were shaking. Her stomach felt queasy. Her heart had started beating again, fast. She took 3 deep breaths. That didn't work, so she took 3 more. Calm down, she told herself. The first thing to realize was that there were no voices. None. Period. There could not have been. Mice don't talk. And the house was definitely not haunted, because there's no such thing as haunted houses. It was her imagination. Her parents always told her she had an overactive imagination. Boy, were they ever right about that. She collected herself, took 1 more deep breath, and walked out of the room. Her mother was still scrubbing the sinks in the kitchen. Her face was redder than ever. Beads of sweat were running down her forehead. Under her breath, she was muttering words that Nicole assumed she was not supposed to hear. Nicole could see that this was still not the time to tell her about the mice, especially mice with voices. Besides, Nicole wasn't so sure what she wanted to tell her parents right now. She wanted the mice exterminated, but it might be fun to have a secret passageway her parents knew nothing about. She would keep that to herself for a while. Clearly, this passageway had to be explored. Clearly, this was an adventure waiting to happen. Clearly, this was a job for Casey. Casey was nowhere to be found. Nicole walked completely around the house. There was no sign of her sister. If her sister were smart, Nicole thought, she would play within sight of the house rather than wander off into the forest where she was likely to get eaten by bears or whatever else lived there. Well, that was her business, Nicole decided. She would stay near the house and have an adventure that was safe. An adventure that wasn't, well, adventurous. She had decided that she had imagined the voices, and she knew why. Too many books. Her father always told her that books stimulated her imagination. Apparently so. Nicole decided she would read fewer books from now on. A lot fewer. Rather than follow Casey down the road and into the bear's den or the hornet's nest or whatever other trouble she had gotten into, Nicole decided to have a look around the clearing. She looked up at the house with its crazy roof and weird windows. Whoever built this house was strange, she thought. Demented, even. She looked around the clearing, and her eyes fell upon the graveyard. It was the family graveyard, no doubt. Who else would be buried here, so far from civilization? Maybe even the weirdo who built this house was buried here. Nicole wondered what his gravestone would say. Maybe, "Here lies Joe Schmo, 1742 to 1805. Boy, he was a weird one. She walked over to take a look. She was a timid person, but she had always enjoyed graveyards. When she was younger, her father used to drive her to a graveyard in Virginia every Sunday so they could feed the ducks. Of course, that was a very different sort of graveyard. That one was spread over acres of rolling hills, covered with neatly mowed grass. The graves were all decorated with silk flowers. In springtime, the blossoming trees made it one of the prettiest places around. Here, there were no silk flowers. There was no neatly mowed grass, only an overgrowth of weeds. There weren't hundreds of gravestones, only 20 or 30. And they weren't even straight. They stuck up from the ground at odd angles, one leaning to the left, another to the right. A couple had fallen over and seemed to be sinking into the ground. The older ones had moss growing on them. The names and dates were hard to read. Nicole felt excited. Graveyards were like history books in a way. They were about real people. It was fun to read the markers and try to guess what you could about the people buried underneath. You could see if the husband or the wife lived longer. She had seen one set of graves where a woman had outlived her first husband, remarried, and had herself buried with one husband on either side of her. Nicole kneeled down and brushed the weeds away from one of the stones. James Fowler, 1899 to 1918, the marker read. His memory will be with us always. He died when he was only 19, Nicole thought. Probably some kind of illness. Doctors weren't too skillful in the old days. She looked at another stone. William Fowler, 1849 to 1865, it said. His memory will be with us always. This family wasn't too original in thinking up epitaphs, Nicole thought to herself. And family members seemed to have a habit of dying young. Suddenly, a cloud blotted out the sun. The clearing was plunged into shadow. The trees, their branches black and bare, seemed to lean in toward the clearing. Nicole felt nervous. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw an area of gravestones smaller than the rest. These must be the graves of children, not 16-year-olds or 19-year-olds like William and James. Little children. She felt afraid. Fear gripped her heart like a cold hand. Where was Casey? Why wasn't she back yet? She'd been gone for hours. Nicole leaped to her feet and ran toward the road. "Casey!" she yelled. "Casey!" She sprinted down the road, nearly tripping in the rutted tire tracks, feeling desperately that something was wrong. "Casey! Casey!" There was no reply.